Hi, everyone. So, my name is Jessica Schwartz, and I'm a member of the Road Socialist Organization here in New York City. I also organize with an organization called the New York Community Action Project, and we are a community organization that focuses on and that is what is to be done. It's not on here. It's not on the front cover because this is the but I promise you in here. And this is just one of my personal favorites because not just by Lenin, but in general, one of my personal favorites. But I think it really lays out how communists should conduct political work, as well as the correct handling of spontaneity in political movements and uprisings. And my comrade Mick Kelly, actually, as well from Freedom Road Socialist Organization, recently published his own review of this work on fightbacknews.org. So definitely go to, again, that is fightbacknews.org, and you can read his review of the work as well. And then they'll get passed on to me, and I'll do my best to answer them. So I'm going to just go over a few concepts and break them down for you, but really what I want to focus on the most is the concept of spontaneity among the people, and particularly how it relates to our current conditions organizing under COVID-19 and what that might look like. And the reason why I wanted to focus on spontaneity of the masses in regard to this work is because we're, everyone, all of you know, we're in a time of a global pandemic. There have been a lot of different calls to actions and a lot of different campaigns, put out by various organizations. And so it's really important that as communists, we orient ourselves as to what we should be doing or, what is to be done. A. And Lenin's work focuses on the labor movement, but I think that this is definitely something that can apply to different movements, whether you're organizing against police crimes, for immigrant rights, for students, for whatever area of work you might be participating in. I definitely think there's some important lessons to be gained from this. And so, just as a little bit of a context for the reading, What is to be Done was published in 1902, and in What is to be Done, Lenin discusses the labor movement and the need for a vanguard party. He references labor strikes that ignited across Russia in 1896, their spontaneous character, and how communists should seize the opportunity of spontaneous uprisings to guide people toward a revolutionary consciousness. And so Lenin describes the spontaneous element as consciousness in embryonic form. And what he means by this is that the workers should participate, or they would participate in strikes or riots without having any guiding ideology or party behind it. And so this can lead to different errors. And he describes them as having more of a trade union consciousness, where they see the immediate needs of fighting the bosses and fighting for a union. Lenin describes this, but they don't necessarily have a socialist ideology. And he describes also the concept of economism as a tendency where there's a focus simply on the immediate battles against the bosses on the shop floor without drawing it out to the political system as a whole. So as like one example that might is PPE because their workplace is not providing it to them. So they might start this campaign and then say if someone who's more of a socialist wanted to participate and then try to draw it out to the system as a whole, like, yeah, the PPE that we're not receiving by our bosses, it's a symptom of this wider system as a whole called capitalism that really prioritizes profit over people. And so an economist might be like, whoa, 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 no, cut that out. We're only here to focus on this one demand of getting PPE, and that's it, without drawing it out to the system as a whole and really helping people understand why it is the way that it is. And so where does this revolutionary consciousness come from? If you've read Mao, you know it definitely does not come from the sky. And Lenin, in What is to be Done, describes socialism as a philosophy that came from the, and I might butcher this word, intelligentsia. Okay, I think I got it. But basically, he said that socialist ideology came from outside of the labor movement. And you might be wondering, well, if socialism is an ideology that upholds the working class, then how is it coming from outside the labor movement? Well, a critique that he brings up and that some of you might have heard is that if you're a socialist, I'm sorry, I'm just going over my notes. Essentially, yes, if we're a socialist and you're organizing among workers, why talk about socialism? Why even raise the question of socialism if the focus is on trade union? And why bring it up? And we could extend this as well as why bring it up in our various areas of work, as I mentioned before, from immigrant rights, student rights, police crimes. And that's because our job as communists is to bring revolutionary ideas to the masses and raise consciousness simply from a trade union ideology to a revolutionary or socialist consciousness. And one tenet of FRSO, for example, is that we maintain, and this is something that's definitely described in the reading, is that we need to fuse Marxism with the working class because the conditions now under capitalism is that the majority of workers are not Marxists. There is no guiding vanguard party at the moment to really lead a revolution. And so that's why it's our job as communists to take this ideology that came from the bourgeoisie, from the intelligentsia, and bring it to the working class, fuse it in order to build a vanguard party, in order to overthrow imperialism. And so, I mean, what does this have to do? I know I've been talking a lot about economism, trade unionism, socialism, but what does this really have to do with anything with what's going on now and trying to organize under COVID-19? So at this time, I know, feel free to submit some examples that you've seen as well. But during this time, I've definitely seen here in New York many different calls to action, many different demands that have been going on. And so, for example, Governor Cuomo, he has still refused to support any kind of rent cancellations. And he also put a pause on people paying their mortgages, homeowners paying their mortgages, but tenants at this time, even if they can't get evicted right now, there's still no law in place protecting us in terms of not paying our rent because it's still expected that we pay it. So because of this, there's been many different calls to action and there's been many people demanding different things from rent cancellation or rent suspension to a citywide rent strike. And I mean, this is a positive sign because this is a sign that definitely people see that there is an injustice going on. But it's really important for us as communists to really bring in more of a socialist ideology and to really examine things in a very material way. And so what we should be saying is that the most successful protests and actions come from organization, not simply individuals spontaneously deciding to not pay the rent, because that could actually organize a rent strike, as I mentioned, should be done through an organization that is prepared to take on the task of not only organizing tenants through a rent strike, but then to also raise consciousness through ongoing struggle and campaigns. It's also important to be realistic and look at your own conditions and assess if whether or not a rent strike is something that's, possible at this present time. Because if, you're not able to organize your entire building, then you might have to think of other ways to fight back and not just simply give in to the spontaneous call of a rent strike. It's really important to examine your conditions and your ability to organize such a such a daunting or such a important kind of action. And it's important to meet people where they're at in order to advance them to more of a socialist consciousness. So if you are in a position to organize a tenant strike or rent strike, then it's important to then maintain those connections and to continue organizing so that people can see the injustice of not just the rent and from landlords, but to understand the system as a whole is set up so that we, the people, the working class, are exploited, and rent is a tool of the ruling class to further exploit us. And the main point that I'm really trying to get across is it's not simply just about jumping on to what's popular. It's also about soberly assessing your capabilities and, you know, building organization in order to really have a strong rent strike or other action that you might participate in. And that's really why it's important for anyone who considers themselves a communist to read What is to be Done by Lenin. Again, this is the essential works, but what is to be done is in here. And so I'm not sure if right now how many people submitted their own questions, but I'm just going to get into some of the questions that we have already. And feel free to continue submitting questions. So, first off, I'm going to answer the question of What was the worst form of economism that you've seen? Um, hmm. I mean, I would say one example is like, and this isn't from a particular organization, but sometimes when I've talked to people or I've seen people try to organize for a minimum wage, if you bring up anything beyond that, then sometimes it gets a little iffy. Like if you try to raise the question of capitalism, then it can become tricky because I know um, certain nonprofits don't necessarily like it when you bring up the fact that it's not just this one issue, but it is definitely tied to the system as a whole. Um, I mean, that's just one example, but correct. I mean, of course, I think it's definitely important to point out if something's incorrect in terms of, um, advancing struggle. Because if, for example, you are leading a protest and you're just having a rally, and then the crowd wants to march, and that's like, perhaps a little bit more militant, and you have the ability to do so, but then you might have more of what would be called sort of an intermediate group of, okay, this is an injustice, but we shouldn't be marching, we shouldn't be elevating the struggle because you know we want to play it safe. And so I think in terms of that, it's really important to struggle against that, because in the reading in particular, Lenin really, when he references freedom of criticism, he's more so referencing the more opportunist elements, trying to take away class struggle in from Marxism. And so when he's referencing freedom of criticism, he's more so referencing the more right elements of like Klotsky and Bernstein, as opposed to just criticizing more, I guess, um, intermediate or right tendencies. What is your favorite Lenin work and why? Well, it might cause a surprise to you, but my favorite Lenin work is What Is to Be Done, because excuse me, I can go on about it all day. I really had to temper myself with this study Sunday, because there's just so much great information in here. And I think it really, because something I've witnessed in my organizing firsthand is definitely this question of, well, if you're a socialist and you're trying to like organize, then you basically should just give in to, maybe it's not phrased this way, but give in to the spontaneous element. And if you try to bring in more of a revolutionary socialist consciousness, you're being elitist, or you're trying to bring books into it. It's not about reading, it's about just organizing. But as a Marxist, you understand that theory guides practice, practice guides theory. It's a dialectical approach. So I would say that's definitely something I've seen firsthand of people participating, quite frankly, in red baiting, because they don't want communists in their organizations, talking to other people about communism, because a lot of people actually end up agreeing with it. And then it kind of, exposes contradictions there. What is your advice in finding a campaign that isn't spontaneous? Well, actually, a really good work that talks about this is the Road Socialist Organization Mastermind pamphlet. I wish I had one readily on hand that I can just pull and show you, but I don't. I'm sorry, I have something coming from management. Okay, and so actually, thank you, Michaela, for that. So there will be a link in the chat for the Freedom Road Socialist Organization's mass line pamphlet, and that pamphlet really, I think, is a great example of. It goes through how to organize a campaign, because really it's an approach as a communist where you have to meet people where they're at. And for example, in my work that I'm doing right now, and we've been tabling a lot in the South Bronx, and I don't live in the South Bronx. I don't necessarily know all of what's going on there, and there's definitely particular conditions there that I've not experienced and that are not exposed to me. So we have been tabling there and really just talking to people firsthand to see what kind of problems or issues that they would like to have addressed or organized around. So then once we talk to people, it's important to bring it back and talk about, okay, well, this person said that they've been turned away from Lincoln Hospital because they're an addict, or this person says that they will get stopped in the park by police for no real reason, and just all these different issues. And then we discuss it, summate it, and then think of a campaign that could directly meet those needs. And so that's why we've definitely been pursuing a community control the police campaign, because in the Bronx there is a lot of police harassment and police brutality, and it's really important for the police to be held accountable. And excuse me, that's just one example of a campaign or a method to use to find a campaign that isn't nearly isn't merely just following spontaneity, but also is taking the needs of the people and addressing it. What kind of action should I do during COVID-19? Well, that is it really depends on where you are and like what you think is or what kind of work you're doing. Because, for example, one action that I really want to give a shout out to is to the Teamsters in Tampa, Florida, because they were able to hold a social distancing action demanding more PPE, hand sanitizer, and other protections in the workplace. And they were actually able to win, I want to say, most of their demands. And that's just one example. If you are in an organization like that is a tenant organization, then a rent strike is an effective method. But it's just that a lot of the calls I've seen be put out, it's very individualistic, where it's just calling on individuals to not pay the rent as opposed to participating in an organizational effort. And I know some other groups have been campaigning against or to have the people freed from detention centers and from the prisons, because those are two places that are especially vulnerable to coronavirus. So those are just a few examples I can think of, but it's really about investigating the conditions in your area and seeing, what might be most appropriate and what might be in your capabilities at the moment. And so, how do I, before I go on to the last question, is there any other questions that people want to ask? Are there any other questions that have been submitted? Sweet. So, the last question then is, how do I join FRSO? Well, if you are in New York, you can certainly talk to me or send a message to our Facebook page. But also, if you go to FRSO.org, there should be an option to click join, and you'll be able to send a message to us. So, no matter where you are, someone can reach out to you. And either if you are close to an area where we are, then we can link you up, or we can talk to you and see what you can do in the meantime if you are not in an area where we currently have members. So, if that is it for the questions, thank you all so much for joining me on this Study Sunday. And you could follow Freedom Road Socialist Organization to continue getting these live streams and participating in these Study Sundays. Stay safe and red salute.